10 days ago, we released Smart Resizer 2.0, and in that release video, I went over all the new changes. I also showed you some practical examples of how to use Smart Resizer. So if you haven't seen that video, I highly recommend that you check it out. But today we are releasing Smart Resizer 2.1. And in this release, we've made a lot of small changes, a lot of fixes, so you can definitely download it today. So in this video, I'm gonna go over all the new changes in both Smart Resizer 2.0 and Smart Resizer 2.1. So without any further ado, let's dive right in. The first change is the obvious one because we have changed the name of the tool from Smart Sizer to Smart Resizer. And the reason why, because as you can see, Smart Sizer is also very similar to the name of another tool that we have called Smart Size. And both of them are different tools, but they have very similar names. And as you can see, that created some confusion among users. Top Shelf has been introduced to the UI of the tool, and it definitely changed the way it works. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So we do have Smart Resizer, and as you can see, we have a top shelf that has all of the global buttons that you need for this tool. And this kind of workflow is different from where it used to be. And for example, we have Smart Sizer, which is the Smart Resizer 1.0 essentially. And as you can see, we don't have a top shelf, which means that to run this tool, you had to click on one of these 5 buttons and then it would run it. So it's kind of confusing because it wasn't consistent to all the other tools that we already have. So the idea was to change it to make it look like all the other tools that we have. As you can see, we have a top shelf, top shelf, top shelf, and we have a run button on all of them. So you make all the changes and then you run the button, run the button. So that's the idea, to take this and to change it into something like this. With the top shelf, we can change all of these parameters. And then when we are ready to run it, we would just click on this run button and then it would run the tool. And as you can see, it stays very consistent. Now we do have some tools that don't have the top shelf, and Smart Anchor, Smart Rect, and Smart Scroll are definitely one of them. And the idea is to essentially move all of these to this side with the top shelf. So we started with the Smart Sizer, and we're going to be going to all of them as well. Smart Resizer comes with 2 different modes, and it's very important to understand the difference between the two because these 2 modes are like the core of this tool. So let's navigate over to Smart Resizer, and in the top shelf, you'll see 2 buttons. Those 2 buttons are the modes. So the first mode is Code Mode Off, and the second one is Code Mode On. Now, by default, it is always set to Code Mode Off. And really the difference between the two is this. So if you have Code Mode Off selected, and if you select the layers, so make your selection, then we're going to go to this Fit To tab. And in here, we can enable a feature. So we're going to say, hey, stretch our selected layers based on the width and maintain the aspect ratio. And then we're going to go to Size tab in here, and we're going to say stretch it to 500 pixels on the width. So that's what it's going to do. So after all this, we have Code Mode Off selected. So if I run this, it will resize it, right? Smart Resizer. So it resizes it to 500 pixels. And if you don't have Code Mode On selected, that's all it does. It just resizes it because Code Mode Off essentially is a resizing tool, and that's all it does. If I do this, for example, if I try to type something, it doesn't really do anything else. It just resizes the selected layers. Now, let me undo this real quick. And let's do the same thing. So we have our layer selected. We're going to go back to Smart Resizer, and we have the same mode here, and we're basically resizing it on the width to 500 pixels. So we're doing the exact same thing. The only difference is we're going to select Code Mode On. And this time, if I run this, it will resize it. However, it also applies an expression to the scale properties of my selected layers. And also it applies a pseudo effect to all of my selected layers, which makes this text a responsive text. Because what happened was we set the limit for this text to 500 pixels. So now this text will automatically resize itself when it reaches that 500 limit. And as you can see in the pseudo effect right here, our width is defined to 500 pixels. So if I select one of these, so let's go to this one right here. And if I start typing beyond that, as you can see, it locks me into 500 pixels. So it doesn't matter what I type before that, as long as it's not 500, it will stay the same size. But as soon as I reach that 500 pixel limit, it will automatically size it down. And again, that's set in the width right here. I can always extend this, and now it's set to 600 something, so I can go further. icon tabs were added to the current UI of this tool. And let me show you what I'm talking about. So if you navigate over to the Smart Resizer, you'll see these icons in here right underneath this top shelf. And basically they are just buttons. When you click on one, you'll see the layout will change underneath here. And based on what you click, that's what you'll see in there. So for example, if you hover over any of these tabs, it'll tell you what they are. So this one is fit to, and also the icon visually will tell you what that is as well. So when you click on that, you'll see all these fit to options. The same thing for size. When you click on this, you'll see size options, and the same thing for margin as well. And also this size based on. Now the reason why I like this route, because of three things. Number one, we are staying consistent with other tools. So for example, we already have Smart Animator. It has similar system as well. We have the top shelf, we have these tabs. So if you know how to use this layout, then you can quickly figure out how to do it here. So it's definitely for user experience. It will make things easier to kind of switch from one tool to the other. So number two is to make things more simplified. So for example, this is what it used to look like before. As you can see, we have all of the tools kind of visible, and obviously we have more tools now. So everything is kind of out in the open, which in some ways it's nice, but it makes things kind of cluttered and kind of hard to figure out what's what. But with tabs, we can easily kind of group things, put them in groups. And in general, visually, it's more appealing, it's more efficient, and you can quickly get to places without trying to figure out what's what. So that's the second reason. And the third reason, this way of working also allows us to add more features. So it gives us room for growth. And what I mean by that is this. So anytime you add a new feature, in the past, I would just have to kind of add it to the current layout. In the way it kind of created things more congested and like cluttered. So then also the size of it changed. So we had to kind of grow the size. But with tabs, we can quickly just create a new tab. And then when you click on it, we can add all the features we want to add. So it definitely gives us room for growth. Global and local reset buttons were added to the UI. Let me show you what that looks like. So if you navigate over to the Smart Resizer panel, you see them right here. It's basically three little buttons. So we have the reset button, and then we have two other buttons. And basically these two buttons determine what kind of reset you're doing. So for example, if you have it set to local, and if you hit reset, it will only reset values that are local, meaning in this current tab. However, if you switch it to global and hit reset, not only will it reset everything locally, meaning in current tab, but it will also reset things in this tab, that tab, basically in all the other tabs as well. So locally does it only in one tab, global does it in all of them. So let me show you a visual example here. So for example, we're going to go to size. We're going to change the width to 11, height to 22. Let's do the same thing for margin, 33, 44, and maybe pick a different button here and also there. So now we're going to go back to size, and let's set it to local and hit reset. So notice it reset everything to default value, but it only did it in this current size tab. If I go to margin, it didn't do it there. If I go to fit to, it didn't do it there either. So now let's go back to where we were before. So 11, 22. Now if I set it to global and hit reset, notice it did reset everything to default here in this current tab, but if I go to margin, it did the same thing in margin, the same thing in size based on, and also the same thing in fit to. Pull layer width and height feature has been added to the UI. Let me show you what that looks like. Let's navigate back to the Smart Resizer panel. And if you click on size tab, you'll see two new icons. And basically the first icon is pull width from selected layer, and the second one is pull height. So if you click on width, it will give it to you in here. Height will import it in here. So the way it works is very simple. Just select a layer and you can quickly get the width of this layer by clicking on this pull width button. When you do that, it'll show it to you in pixel value. You can adjust the size, you can pull it in. There it is. The same thing for the height. You can pull in the height, you can adjust the size of it, and it works like a charm. Now the beautiful thing about this, you can quickly maybe select this layer here and pull in the width, maybe get rid of this value here, and you can select all the other layers, and now all of your selected layers will adjust to this width, which is the width of this layer. So you can quickly run it like that, and then it works like a charm. You can now do basic math inside of text input in the UI. Let me show you what I mean. So if you navigate back to the Smart Resizer, if you go to something like size or margin, notice we have text input, but inside here, you can actually do math now. It's something you weren't able to do, but you can now. So you can type something like 50 plus 10, and when you click away, notice it will add it for you, or you can say 50 times 2, and you can even use parentheses. You can say something like 50 times 2, and then divide by 4. And when you click away, it'll give you the proper value. You can now use width and height keywords to get the proper width and height of the current selected composition. And let me show you what that means. For example, right now I am in this composition and I have this composition selected and the size of it is 1500 by 800. Basically the width and the height, 1500, 800. So I can quickly use a keyword to get the width of this composition by going to Smart Resizer, and anywhere you can input text, whether it be size or margin, we can use keywords. And basically, if I wanted to get the width of the current selected composition, I would just type width, and just like that, it will give me a number. Now, it does it based on selection. So if I select this one, even though I'm in the other composition, I have selected this one, and the size of it is 1920 by 1080. So if I type a keyword width, notice it gives me a different size based on my selection. So that's an important note here. Make sure you select the proper composition if you're going to do that. So now I can do this. Maybe I can do, give me the width of the composition, right? And then I can size them all to that, right? Or I can do this. Maybe I can say width divided by 2 and then size it. So it can come in definitely very handy. You can also do the same thing for the height. You can just type height, and it'll give you the height of the current composition. You can now increase or decrease the input value by clicking the arrow buttons. Let me show you what that means. If you navigate back to the Smart Resizer panel, and each value here has 2 arrows, one going up, one going down. And basically you can quickly take the value up by 1 pixel or down by 1 pixel. And so that's something we definitely didn't have before in the Smart Resizer. As you can see, we don't have them in here. Now you can do the same thing with up and down arrows, and the same thing is still possible here as well. But the cool thing about this, you can type any value you want and you can continue editing it using these arrows. Layer scale limit feature has been introduced in this version of the tool. Well, let me kind of explain what it does, because in a way it fixed a problem we used to have with the previous version of this tool. So for example, I'm going to select this text layer. I'm going to navigate back to the Smart Resizer. We're going to activate code mode on, so make sure it's on. And then I'm going to go here to the fit to, I'm going to fit to the width and maintain the aspect ratio. So I'm going to resize it down, but I want for the text to maintain the size aspect ratio. And then we're going to go to size here. We're going to limit this to 1000 pixels. Basically size it down to 1000 pixels and then limit it. Basically it's going to be responsive. Okay, so I'm going to run this, and just like that, it's exactly 1000 pixels. It doesn't matter what I type. Once it hits that limit, it's going to start sizing down. So it will not let me go past that width limit, which is 1000 pixels. Okay, so that's clear. But watch what happens when I type period. Notice it maintains the same size. It's 73% all the way through. It doesn't matter what I type. However, here's what happened before. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to select this. We're going to navigate to the Effect Controls panel. And in here, Smart Resizer, we're going to go to Scale Limit. That's something that wasn't here before. It's something I added in this version. So here's what it used to do. It used to be set to none. And remember, you couldn't even adjust this. So it was set to none, and that's it. You didn't have a say-so in that matter. So now when I would type something like period, watch this, it just becomes super big. And here's why, because right now the scale is 73.1, that's the correct one. But when you type something small, it wants to automatically stretch it to that. And what happens, it blows it up. It goes past 73.1. And so it breaks the whole thing up to a point, but then once you start typing it, it's fine. So it worked fine unless you typed small characters in the beginning. So to fix it, I introduced this scale limit. Basically, and I wanted to manually say, hey, don't go past certain limit. Now you can set it to 100% at all times, or you can set it to custom limit, which in this case, because it sized it down, it started at 100, but because it sized it down, it went to 73. And so it does it automatically. You don't even have to worry about this, but I just kind of want you to be aware of what's going on. So now it's set a limit to 73.1. And now it doesn't matter what I type in here. I can type period. Notice it stays at that limit. It doesn't blow it up. So that's how I was able to fix it. Size based on tab has been added to the UI. So let me show you what that means. If you navigate back to the Smart Resizer, and if you go down here, you'll see this new icon. This is size based on tab. When you click on it, you'll see these new buttons. Now, even though it's a new feature in the UI, it's definitely not a new feature for Smart Resizer. It was always here in the previous version of this tool. However, it always lived in the pseudo effect of the layer. So let me show you what that means. For example, if I select this layer and if I activate this code mode on, and if I run this, notice we do have a tab called size based on. And so this was always here in previous version of this tool. So it's definitely nothing new. However, this time we have it right here in the UI that you can easily adjust all of these properties from here. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So for example, we have width and height based on, and so we have some options in here. So we can change these by going over here to, let's say, layer endpoint. When you select this and when you run this, notice it updated both of these to layer endpoint. So you can do the same thing for middle. As you can see, it's middle point, out point. There you go. And the same thing for time and custom. Now custom, let's say we go to 2-second mark, right? If I set it to custom, it will change this from current time to custom, and it will also update the custom time in here based on where your time indicator is at. So when you run this, as you can see, it's set it to 2 because this one is at 2, and it's set it to custom. I do realize that a lot of you are not very familiar with the size based on feature in Smart Resizer. So I want to take the time and kind of explain it to you, and hopefully it'll make a lot of sense, because I think this feature is very powerful, and it's very important that you understand how to use it and why it's there to begin with. So let's talk about size for a second. So this text right here, animated text layer, I think you would agree with me that this text is different at 0-second mark than it is at a 1-second mark. As you can see, at 0-second mark, it's much wider, and then at 1-second mark, it's much shorter. So really, if you think about this, size has two parts. It has the size, the width or the height. So that's part one. And then part two, it has another element called time. So we are dealing with a timeline, which means that we are dealing with time. And size does change with time. So not only do you want to grab the width and the height of this text layer, but you also have to be specific where you want to grab it from. So you have to say size and where from. So I know I'm kind of being repetitive. I just really want you to get this. Again, size has two parts, the width or the height and the time. And you always want to be specific where you want to grab the time. So that's why I've added this size based on feature. And basically this feature was always in Smart Resizer, but now we can do it here visually in the UI. And by default, it's always set to current time. And let me kind of show you another example. Let's go to size tab, for example, and we're going to select this text, and we're going to go to 1-second mark, and we're going to pull in the width of this text in here. So that's the width of it at 1-second mark. And that's because we have it set to current time. Now, if I take this time indicator, and basically current time means current time indicator, wherever this time indicator is at. So if I take it to 0-second mark, our current time indicator is right here at 0-second mark. So if I pull this in, notice it gives me a different value of this text because it's much wider. Okay, so we can go anywhere, we can pull this in. So that's what this current time means. Now, there are times, especially if you use code mode on, which we aren't right now, when you want to be more specific. So for example, if I select midpoint of the layer, so imagine this is the layer, this is the end point of the layer, middle, and then end. So in, middle, and end. So if I set it to the middle, and if I take my time indicator to the beginning, so now it doesn't matter where my time indicator is at because it's not set to time. It's set to midpoint, right? So if I go here to size, and if I pull in the value, let's do this, let's reset first. If I pull in the value, notice it's not giving me that big number like 1700. It gives me what it is based on 1-second mark, which is 800. Okay. So that's what it's for. It's just where you want to grab the size. Now it comes in very handy with code, and here's why. So I'm going to go to 1-second mark. Let's delete all of this. Next, I'm going to activate this code mode on, and we're going to go to time. And this time, let's do this. We're going to set it to current time, basically current time indicator. So we're going to do this. We're going to fit this to the width. So it's going to stretch our text, which is totally fine. And we're going to resize this to, let's do something like 600. Okay, so if I run this based on current time indicator, so if I run this, notice it sized it down, so that's good. But watch this, it kind of limit everything to that 600 pixel value, because it does it based on current time. So at this current time, it's going to say 600. At this current time, it's going to be 600. So it does it everywhere. And because of that, it kind of limits us to that value. So again, current time, meaning it's going to be 600 at every frame, wherever this time indicator is at. Now, if I undo this, and we'll do the same thing. We're going to set it to 600 pixels. So we're going to resize it to 600 and limit it to that. But this time we're going to say, hey, don't limit it at every frame. Just limit it based on like the middle of this layer. And I usually like to go with the middle, because a lot of times when you have text animation, it usually happens at the beginning of the layer or at the end of the layer. But in the middle, it's usually static. So that's usually a safe place to grab the finalized size, right? So now I'm going to set it to midpoint, and I have the code mode on. It is set to 600. We're stretching it to the width. And if I run this, it did set it to that, okay? But now it does it only at the midpoint time frame. It only set it to 1 second mark. So if I scroll through this, it's gonna animate it fine, no problem, because it's only referencing at this. So it basically says, hey, change it to that size at this 1 second mark, and then don't worry about everything else. So now I can type things, and it will always kind of limit it to whatever I'm typing here, but elsewhere, there's no limit. In this release of Smart Resizer, I've also added some small changes that I quickly want to mention. And one is definitely, I have went back into the code for both expressions and the script. I updated the code, I cleaned it up and made it more efficient, so it should be faster. And then the second thing I've done, I went ahead and fixed all the errors that were there previously in previous versions of this tool. So let me show you these errors. So for example, right now I have the old tool applied, so Smart Resizer, and I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna delete this text. Watch what happens when I delete it. As you can see, it breaks the whole tool. It breaks the expression, and that was a problem. It only happened when you erase the text. Now, for some reason, I didn't think people would erase the text, but that actually happens a lot when you create templates. And that was a big no-no. So I fixed that one. And then another thing happened when you did this. So if you go and bring in an animator like scale, and if you take it down all the way to 0, it also breaks it. So that's definitely a problem. So those two errors I did fix. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Let me get rid of this, and let's apply the new Smart Resizer. So I'm gonna apply this, and we'll do the same thing. We're gonna delete the text, and as you can see, it doesn't break it. Let me undo this. And then I'm gonna go and bring in scale animator and take it down to 0. And now when I click away, as you can see, it doesn't break it either. All right, well, that's the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching it. And also thank you for getting our tools, for using them, for supporting us. We wouldn't be able to do what we do here at Ukramedia if it wasn't for awesome people like you. So thank you. But in the meantime, my name is Sergey Praknevsky, and this is ukramedia.com.